Mechele Newell is a second and third grade teacher, change agent, advocate for the underrepresented and underprivileged youth, and a leader in her local ministry in the Bay Area. A former laboratory scientist, she supports youth and education in her local community by volunteering in local public and private schools. What caused her to get into K-12 teaching was a time she spent coaching girls basketball. Welcome to the podcast, Mechele.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you told me in the pre-chat a lot about how you took kind of an untraditional pathway to get into education. Tell me a little bit about how you're working as a lab scientist and you taught adults and being in the Army, how that kind of led into where you are currently in your role as an elementary school teacher.
Sure, no problem. So I was in the Air Force, actually.
So,
um, and yeah, and I was a clinical laboratory scientist, and the area I worked in, or my specialty, was microbiology. And during that time, while I was enlisted, one of my senior leaders asked me to do some didactic training, which in the classroom teaching, I never really considered it to be my thing, but I loved teaching on the job, like in the laboratory. So I was a little thrown back, and she's like, you should do it. The kids, that's what we called our young airmen, the kids, they love you. I want you to try it. And so I did, and it was amazing. And so from there, after I separated from the Air Force, I was a post-secondary educator at a kind of a vocational school for lab assistants and phlebotomists and EKG techs in Sacramento. And so I went there to teach a class. That's all I wanted to do. They didn't have an externship coordinator to set up sites for the kids after they finished the program, right? So they could practice their skill.
okay.
And so I kind of took that job on, which was interesting. I'm not sure if I talked about this in pre-show, but I took that job on and I had to create a didactic portion just for kids going on externship because they had spent almost a year waiting to get on site. So all of that took place in about 7 or 8 months. The Air Force called me back. They had this job. They said, you should apply for it, right? Because I would have wanted it as a civilian now. And so I applied for that job. I got in. And during my own personal time, I coached JV girls basketball at a local high school. And it was, I don't know, it was overwhelming, the experience. During that time coaching, you know, you learn kids, and a lot of the kids, the school has an international baccalaureate program.
Mm-hmm.
So you will get kids who come from really what people would call good schools, you know, with high academics,
Yeah.
to come to be a part of the baccalaureate program. And you will get kids from the neighborhood. And it's positioned in such an area where you may not have the highest socioeconomic bracket living in that area. So you have a very diverse group of kids. And so during my coaching time, I just got to meet a lot of young people that I felt like, man, these kids could make it playing sports, go to college, you know? And unfortunately, my experience as their coach, wanting them to go to college, it was strongly opposed, seemingly, by some of the educators. They didn't feel like, you know, if you had conversations and said, hey, you know, I really want to start something to help them to keep their grades up, because we required certain level of grades for them to be able to play.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get responses like, well, they're not going to college anyway, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, it gave me a different look at our kids in certain communities, the type of teachers that came there and stayed there. And so I wanted to have a different type of impact. And I think it was around that time when I really started strongly considering teaching K-12.
Mm-hmm. So just getting into those schools, coaching, it gave you an idea of how there wasn't any positive light being shown into these kids, right? They weren't being maybe the rigor was there. As you said, there was an international baccalaureate program, but a lot of these black and brown kids, you said, they just, there wasn't anybody to believe in them, right? There wasn't anybody to push them to apply to colleges and tell them that, they can follow their dreams, correct?
So you're talking about, what we're talking about is pretty much segregation within one school.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have. You have, now granted, there are some black and brown kids that are in the IB program, but they're few. You know what I mean? And then the vast majority, though, they're going to regular gen ed classes, and some of their teachers, I won't say all, right? Because who knows if maybe these are just the teachers I'm dealing with. Maybe they have fantastic teachers who care, but I don't get to see that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there were some, they just, I don't know, maybe it was time for them to get out of education, but
Yeah.
they didn't have that, you know what, that's a good idea. Or maybe, you know what, I actually do offer tutoring. There was none of that. It was just like, why do you care?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to make a difference. It won't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You were coaching these young girls that you knew had strong potential, and you were seeing that happen. So how much time went between you coaching and you kind of realizing, hey, I want to become a teacher, I want to make a difference in these kids' lives?
I coached for about 4.5. When I say 4.5 years, I'm talking about actual seasons, right? And I think I'd say about maybe that third season, but I wasn't bold enough to leave my good government job. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
Who's going to give that up, right?
Get paid a lot less.
You know, I've got my own house to worry about. I have my sister, I have this baby, this little kid. He's a toddler, or yeah, he's about a toddler then. And I'm just like, I can do so much better if I just stay where I am.
Mm-hmm.
But the impact wasn't as great for these kids, right?
Yeah.
Or for the impact that I felt like I could have.
Yeah, and you felt that calling, right? There's a lot of people that feel they can make a difference. They know that, money's going to be tight when they go into education, but they know that they're needed in that area, and they find the niche, right? They find an area where, there's certain kids that need them, or, what got you from teaching the JV girls, the high schoolers, to choosing to teach elementary school?
I didn't choose elementary. I would have never chosen elementary, okay? I knew in, I'd say, what is this, 1920 school year? So at the beginning of 2019, it was January 2019, I said, I'm leaving my job and I'm going to teach. And my plan was to teach middle school science. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because the school I chose was the school I'm at. I chose this school because I believed in the charter that was written for the school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted the oldest kids they had there, which was middle school. And when you go to teach, there are a lot of hoops that you got to jump through, right? If you don't take a traditional route. I have a doctorate in education, but it's an educational leadership. And I was using this for other reasons, not for, teaching and teaching kids, I should say. And so I wanted to apply to have one of the intern credentials, and there are certain credits you have to have. It just didn't work. I could not teach what I wanted to teach at the end of the day. And so I really wanted to be in this school, though. I had already left my job. I still had some savings because I knew I was going to lose probably more than half of my paycheck. So I started saving. So I was living off of that. I did a few subbing gigs between the school I'm at now and another charter around the corner. And then I was having a conversation with one of the guys who worked for the county, and he said, you could roll right in teaching elementary. And I thought, what? Well, I hope they have a 5th grade slot, right?
Yeah, that really surprised you, huh?
It shocked me. It shocked me because that wasn't my plan. And when I went in to meet with the leaders of my school, they offered me kind of like a super sub position. And I said, okay, I can do that. But that's not really teaching. When teaching is what you love, you don't want to sub for nobody else.
Yeah, you want to be a regular teacher.
So I went into this 3rd grade class for one day. And I left out, and I called over one of the leaders. I said, listen, if they need a sub again tomorrow, I want to do it, because I had already picked up. You just can't have subs coming in and out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they needed something.
Something consistent. Hmm.
They needed it. And she looked at me, she said, "Really? How did you like that class?" I said, "I loved it."
Hmm.
It became my class. The next day we had open house, or what do they call it out here? Back to school night.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm standing there not knowing a thing about a thing.
About teaching this age group. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I was just very honest with my parents. You know, I shared my own experiences and my own history, and that was it. It was off to the races.
Mhm. And so
Yeah.
how did the past school year go? Did you guys kind of learn together and you picked it up as you went?
Listen, it was amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like I always want to put a plug in for education. I put a plug in for post-secondary education and just learning wherever you can, because there's something to be said about picking up knowledge wherever you go.
Yeah.
I do some online teaching or tutoring as a contractor, and I learned a lot. This is weird, but I learned a lot about Common Core standards just from doing this online teaching stuff that I do. So it was almost like I was preparing myself for a couple of years, not even knowing that I'd be teaching this grade level.
Hmm.
So it was really, the curriculum is great. It's very strong. And I don't know, I felt like I had a lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings, but I look back over the year and I don't think there was a time within the year that I didn't want to get up and go.
Yeah. You
I,
found your place and you realized that that was a place for you, correct?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. My parents, my families are amazing. When you hear people say, you know, certain people don't care about their kids, it's not true. I don't know a parent who doesn't care about their child. I'm talking about homeless parents. They could be strung out parents. Parents care about their kids and they want to know that they're being taken care of. And so I think the biggest thing for me this year was having my parents' backing and support. They were always there, always involved. They
Mhm.
always have a voice. My kids, we went through whatever we went through, and we learned how to be a community. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the bottom line. When you have that class in elementary school, you are a crew, you are a community. So you having forged those relationships with parents early on, how did that help when you were relying on them when you did the remote teaching at the end of the school year?
Oh, it was amazing. I have parents texting me, emailing me like, "Look, you better get your kid. He does not, or she does not want to do their work." And I'm like, "Hey, listen, here's the thing about the whole remote learning thing. We have to think about equity." And
Mhm.
so at the forefront of my mind is, what would I prefer? Would I prefer that this child gets on here and does all this work, or would I prefer that they're mentally okay, that they're socially and emotionally rooted and grounded? That's what I care about. So
Yeah.
I remind my parents, look, I'm making videos for them. I don't want you to have to worry about this. You do whatever it is. Everybody has something. People are losing their jobs.
Mhm.
Parents are losing their homes. We already start out with kids who don't have a home. So it only got worse. So I had to reassure them, I don't even listen in real life. If they don't touch a single page, I don't care as long as they are okay. However, because I am in a community with people who care about their kids, parents were like, they're driving in the car and the kid is in my Zoom session.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's great to see.
Yeah, it takes everyone. That um, African proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child is true.
Yeah.
All hands on deck.
Yeah, and that was definitely shown with that, those relationships you forged with the parents and the community. They realized you brought them in. You shared so much with them, right? At the beginning of the school year and learning together. And then, they trusted, you were going to provide the schooling, the Zoom meetings, the curriculum for their kids, and they were supporting you and making sure that their kid was able to get online whenever
Absolutely.
possible, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you talked a little bit about your plan from here going into next school year and being that social justice change agent, especially in the education of Black and Brown kids. We're talking so much today about culturally responsive pedagogy, correct? And
Yes.
having educators who are able to bring that in and talk about it. And just me being Caucasian, I know that it's very important as an administrator to have that, talk about it and be open about
Right.
it. So what are your plans as you go into the next school year and maybe becoming more of that change agent in your community?
I'm so excited about this school year to come. I have time to plan. When
Yes.
I went in last year, it was week 5 or week 6
Yeah.
into the school year. So we finished on Thursday, right? I did. My kids finished on Wednesday. And right now, I'm just pulling the curriculum apart
Hmm.
for 4th grade because I'm moving up with my kids.
Hmm.
And well, with the majority of them, the 3rd graders, we're moving to 4th. And so I'm pulling that curriculum apart. The blessing for me is that I know my kids. The vast majority of them that are going to be in my class, I already know them.
That's good.
So being able to go into that curriculum and pull it out and to think about each and every one of them and see, all right, how can I make this something that matters to them?
Hmm.
One of the biggest things for me this year at the end was having parents tell me, my daughter has so much confidence.
Hmm.
My son, he wants to have a part in political change.
Hmm.
To hear parents say, my child never talked about until this year,
Yeah.
it's overwhelming because I did not go into it with a checklist. It
Hmm.
is just who I am, and when things came up, we dealt with it.
Hmm.
And I will say the biggest struggle for me was having had taught adults and working with adults, trying to figure out, how do I say this to this 7, 8, 9 year old,
Hmm.
right? But you still have to say it, whatever it is.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yes,
it's just rewording it, that there's, a lot of things that they, what's going on with
right. They want to
the
know.
riots right now. There's a lot we need to be able to tell kids in a way that they can understand
Yes.
why the riots are going on, and why
Yeah.
there's a history of racial tension in the country, correct?
Hmm.
And it's so important now for kids wanting to be the change agent even at their age. I mean, we've seen with the pandemic how kids have written letters to the healthcare workers. Kids have reached out and been very empathetic, and just showed that they care from home. But as we go on in the next school year, and just depending on how things play out with the current tensions and riots, I think a lot of kids, a lot of time I think of like high schoolers, right? They're the ones that,
Hmm.
they'll have their clubs and everything, and they'll put on, social change. But you have those elementary school kids who are willing to plan things. And what do you see your kids doing as 4th graders, and maybe making a difference in the community?
One thing I love about them is that they know a lot, and some people will say they're too mature for their age, but
Uh-huh.
they live in this very real world.
Yeah.
We've had death in our classroom of our family members at the hand of violence. They know it.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested in completing some projects with them
Mhm.
within our community. What can we, if we had one thing that we can fix or that we could make a stink about or make some noise about, what would it be?
Mhm.
From our conversations last year, one of the kids said, I want to play in my neighborhood park. I can't even go to my neighborhood park and play. So it's those type of issues that let's talk about, because our first unit in English language arts and humanities is on government.
Mhm.
So having conversations around that, giving them the tools that they need to even go home and encourage their parents, go to some town hall meetings, go to some council meetings, do something
Mhm.
so we can have, safe environments. I think that that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, because a lot of time, the kids will be a greater influence on their parents to go and make a difference than you as an educator a lot of time to the parents, or a local politician would be to those kids.
Right.
So yeah, I think
Hmm.
presenting thoughts and ideas to the kids through social studies and language arts. And do you have any books that you intend on using to teach kids about social justice, that may maybe of interest to other educators, that are maybe age appropriate for your students?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you my main method of teaching
Mhm.
with my kids when it comes to stuff like this is storytelling. It
Okay.
is very cultural for us to tell stories. We sit, even as adults, we'll
Mhm.
sit around and listen to our elders tell us stories.
Mhm.
And so I'm reading a book right now with the book club, and it's called The Education of Blacks in the South from
Okay.
1860 to 1835. And I believe the author's name, his last name is Anderson. I can't remember his first name,
Okay.
but this is when I'm reading books, because we always come together and talk about what are we reading. I read to my kids the last 10 or 15 minutes of the school day, and it's usually a book that is culturally relevant.
Yeah.
Some of those stories have violence in them, and we talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
When I say violence, some violence has happened to one of the family members in the story. And so we talk about it. How does that make us feel? What could we do differently? You know, that kind of stuff. But I also share with them my learning. Do you know how important it is for kids to see you learning?
Yeah, I mean, as an educator, you're learning along the way. So them seeing that
Yes,
you're constantly learning, you're a lifelong learner, then they value education even more.
they do. So I have shared, I think, the first 2 chapters of this book study that I'm doing now with them during our Zoom sessions as we go around the room to talk about what we're reading. And it's not me necessarily reading the material, because I get a lot of books, and you can look up books by Googling it, saying culturally relevant or culturally affirming books for whatever group you want. African Americans, Native Americans, and they're out there. And you pull that book. Some of them you can pull up. For Black History Month, we did what we called a blackout, and
Mm-hmm.
we did read alouds only by Black authors. You can pull that stuff up on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, it's very cost effective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the things I do. I share what I'm reading at their level. And again, it amazes me how brilliant they are. They know stuff they shouldn't know.
Yeah.
And so they understand quicker than some adults that I talk to who have never had these experiences.
Yeah, no, it's great to see that you're encouraging discussion among the kids, and you're exposing them to stories, real stories that are happening in the community or that have happened historically, that they're not, you know, they're not sheltered from, the truth, right? A lot of the kids,
Absolutely.
when we were growing up, there was a lot of whitewashing.
Mm-hmm.
We're hoping now, as years go on, everybody will embrace culturally relevant pedagogy and include those books. And I think the important thing is to connect with kids is having something in your curriculum where kids see themselves represented, right?
Yes, and that's my wall I'm making. You know about my wall now, right? With my wall about this is what a doctor looks like.
Yes.
I'm making this wall because too many of my parents throughout the years said my child ran home and said, "I have a Black teacher and she's a doctor." Like it blew their minds. And and I didn't know that they were telling their parents this until recently, but they would always bring it up to me like, so you have a doctor degree? Like they could not, it
Yeah.
didn't make sense to them. And I want them to know that I was you, right?
Yeah.
I was you and you.
Yeah.
And I have friends and other people that were kids before, and we all went to this level. So you can too. So I'm making that wall for them, and it will be incorporated with curriculum, writing standards, reading standards, speaking and listening standards, collaborating standards, things like that.
Uh-huh. Oh, I
I'm
think
very
that's a
excited.
great idea because you have those pictures of the scholars represented, you know,
That's right.
and
And all different ethnic backgrounds, because I have representatives from just about everywhere in my class.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
And kids, they see a represented of, a field that they want to go into, right? I mean, you don't have
Hmm.
to change your mind from
Hmm.
third grade up, but they might want to be a fireman. This is somebody
Right.
that represents, or professor or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a great thing to have, real life representation, other than people that you might just read about in the news or in an article or something like that. So no, that's a great planning as you go into next school year. So, was there anything else that you would like to share just about your background and how you came out of the trenches, and what that's taught you as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I didn't start from the way beginning. I went to school in inner city schools in Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I was raised. I went to a performing arts school for the majority of my upper elementary, middle school, and high school life. And then I feel like my senior year, I went to a suburban school where all the Black kids sat together at the cafeteria table. Okay. It was really uncomfortable. And that was where I got a really good dose of racism. That's where I learned that some people, it doesn't matter how well you do, they're not going to like you.
Yeah.
And they're going to teach you, though. They're going to teach you, right? And so my guidance counselor there, she's the one who pretty much got me on this path of getting a terminal degree, right? Because she told me I never would. She said, you'll never go to a 4-year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it kind of put a real big spark, in my life to achieve and accomplish the highest level of learning I could in my field.
Mm-hmm.
But not just that, as I look at these children and as I work with my colleagues, there are some things I don't tolerate. We're not going to call these kids wild animals. We're not going to say that they're, you know what I'm saying? We're not going to use degrading and demeaning terms about our kids, because they can accomplish things, and our words, they matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
So when I sit my kids on the carpet, if we're having a crazy day, and I say, everybody to the carpet, and I'll start with the one in the corner. You know what I love about you? And I'll just go down the list, because first of all, that helps me to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're sitting there with smiles. You're my next teacher. You teach math very well. Tomorrow you're going to teach, whatever. And you go around the room and you just affirm them. That is what kids need. So I would just say to any educators, especially if you're teaching in the Black and Brown community, because we don't have it often where kids are affirmed in that way.
Yeah.
Do it. Take the time to do it.
No, I think that's great. That's a great statement to have. If there's anything that you would like people to remember from what we've discussed today, what would that be?
If they're an educator, I would say just keep growing,
Mm-hmm.
keep learning, and remember that these children, they are going to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're growing up, there is going to be something that happened in their lives that's going to motivate them
Mm-hmm.
or discourage them. You really want to be on the motivating end.
Yep. I agree. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was great having you on.
Thank you so much. It was